Hello everyone, we are the Isetta engine project, and we are demystifying the game engine development process. This is our team, and this picture of statement will monitoring array. Our faculty instructors are Mac and Ruth. So the mission of our project is still to demystify the game engine development process by developing a game engine for the twin stick genre and documenting our thoughts, decisions, successes, and failures, and interviewing with industry professionals to gather advice and wisdom. And even though our project focuses on engine development, we are not trying to make the next Unity. Rather, we put our emphasis on learning and sharing and make sure everything we learned is shared to everyone and free online. And our original target audience were gameplay programmers who want to get into engine programming. However, since halves, we recognize that our project is also valuable for ETC students and future ETC tech projects. And we will talk about how we address this addition to our target audience later. And now let's take a look at our overall process. First, of course, we're making the game engine. And alongside the engine development, we're also making a full target game that we're going to support with our engine and several mini games and a lot of tech demos. And every week we share what we learned by doing this too in our weekly blogs. And all three of these will allow us to ask insightful questions during our interview with experts. So this is an overview of all the parts of our project. Next, we're going to dive deeper into each part and talk about what we did for them and how and why we did those and what we learned from the experience. Now moving on to our project results, the what. For our blogs, we wrote 75,000 words with 100 pictures and 26 videos. And our website attracted more than 4,000 unique visitors, even though we didn't push for marketing. And here is an example of our blogs. At the top of the page, we have the summary of what we did for that week for each subsystem. We also have our engine architecture. Then we dive into each subsystem we implemented that week and talk about what the decisions we had to make and what's the process we took to make the decisions and what the research looked like. But after halves, we realized that our blogs were getting super long and dense, and it's hard for newcomers to our website to know where they can get the information they want. So we also added the compendium pages where each compendium corresponds to one topic, and it goes week by week. This is what we did for that topic each week. It also points to the relevant interviews and the postmortem for that topic. And of course, we wouldn't have really sort of deep and broad blogs without the engine work.
At the beginning of the semester, based on our twin-stick shooter genre, we laid out all the components and features we need for our game engine. And after the whole semester, this is what we have right now. We completed almost all the components we want. We added one more GUI component because we need it, and we dropped 4 components, either because they are no longer needed, or it was originally a stretch goal, like the scripting system. To give you some numbers, we wrote almost 22,000 lines of code and 6,000 lines of comments. Every time we finish a major feature, like loading a mesh or playing a song, we make a tech demo for it. The tech demos can help us to prove the functionality as well as to show our work to larger audience. These are all tech demos we have. In addition to that, we also made 4 engine demo games. The first one is the game we showed at halves, and then we have games to prove the network, the collision, and then we have the 4th game, which is a first-person shooter game. We made it because we can, and it's fun to make a game with our engine. All tech demos and games are made by us, the developer of the game engine. Well, is our game engine also usable for other developers? To prove it, we held a Isetta game jam. Our game jam is a 6-hour-long event where the programmers come in and make games with our game engine. We didn't expect much from game jam because it was not in our original plan, and our game engine doesn't mean to be used by everyone. However, it turned out it went well. 12 programmers from ETC come in with zero prior knowledge about what Isetta game engine is like, and with little guidance about what game they should make. They just made it. they make these 9 different games by themselves with their own game ideas. That's really cool, right? The games covered almost all the components we completed except the networking module. And also they covered much more genres than we thought. Our game engine was designed for a twin-stick shooter genre. However, our jammers can make like driving games, puzzle games, that's way beyond our expectation. Just like one festival guest said, if you gave those same developers Unity, you wouldn't see these games. That's also partly why we want to make this pitch project. We want to learn how to make a game engine and jump out of the box from the Unreal and Unity. As we have mentioned, we have a target twin-stick shooter game made in Unreal like this. And after the whole semester, let me introduce you our final game, The Last of Isetta. This is a network game. The player is now playing as a host and waiting for another player to connect. And now let's start the game.
So, as for our interviews, over the course of the semester, we talked to all the people you see here. And we took what we learned and transcribed it. And to share our learnings further, with the ETC Press, we made a printed book of our interviews. And if you look under your seats, you'll find absolutely nothing. The book is right here. And if you would like your own copy, you can get a free one digitally online or buy your own printed version like this. As for the documentary, I really narrowed my scope after SOFs to focus on the journey and really convey that to a laypeople audience who don't know anything about game engines. I initially thought that was going to take about 15 minutes of runtime, but it only took about 10. Still, we don't have that kind of time right now, so here's a 30-second teaser of what to expect.
This field needs kind of more visibility. It's helping others create what their vision is.
Game engines are not black magic.
I still didn't feel I really understood how game engines get made.
Where the hell we suck, right?
It's usually something you probably shouldn't be doing, but at the same time.
So that's what we did over the course of the semester. Now for this phase of the presentation, we're going to talk about the how and why. For the documentary, I focused initially on conveying the human side, and I leaned very hard on it, but what I learned from SOFs and the reception of my rough cut was that it was just the comedy wasn't landing, A, and B, there wasn't enough substance. So I changed course and added more details and substance about the journey. As for the interviews, our process evolved because we started out asking more general questions about engine development. And in order to get the better answers, we needed to focus specifically on what those professionals did. So we scoured their LinkedIn, their Moby Games, which is like IMDb for games, and their personal websites. So we were essentially their stalkers for a week. But it really paid off because we got some very insightful answers that helped us with our engines. And if you're working on any sort of specialized project, we highly recommend talking to professionals because they're always happy to help students.
Bringing it back to the technical side of the project, we expected our engine development to be a lot like our engine planning, where we just went from the lower systems up to the higher ones and just developed them on top of each other, and it wasn't like that at all. What we actually found was we had to revisit previous decisions and kind of remake them and then move on to the current one and keep doing that cycle over and over again. And so what we found out was we knew what to make. The engine architecture diagram was pretty accurate, but we didn't know how exactly. And as an example, this one networking module right here that you can see touches all these different unrelated systems that we would have to bring in other team members who weren't working on networking to decide on decisions for the networking, as well as we'd have to revisit old decisions that maybe had to do with our scene management, simply because we needed to redo something in there so that networking would work. So we found that the development was not just iterative, but also corrective. And that also, we found that with our with what we worked on, because we expected engine development to be most of what we worked on and then some tech demos in there. But what we actually found is that the engine development isn't so gargantuan next to tech demos and games. Tech demos and games are really important to when you're developing an engine. Tech demos, they prove out the features work, that what you made is correct. And so for each system, we would need to make one in order to move on to the next thing and leave that there. And then games, which we didn't anticipate being important, actually prove out that your features are usable, that when you put things together, different features, that it doesn't just break, and that also game developers can use them. And along the same lines of usability, some of the reasons why we thought to hold a game jam was to test the usability of the engine, find some bugs, also test our documentation for game developers. But really, the best thing that we got out of it was to have fun, to enjoy what we had made with other people and see the cool things that they would make with it. It was a really satisfying experience to take what we had made and share it with people and see the results of it. And so that was definitely the biggest draw from us holding that game jam. All right, and moving on from the fun stuff back into the boring, our documentation, we expected to be covering milestones kind of like our different core systems, but what we actually found, just like our iterative architecture development or engine development, was we couldn't really just close things off and push them to the side. We had to keep revisiting and correcting things. So we changed to a weekly blog post structure where we discussed as a team at the beginning, through code review, what we had worked on, and then we categorized it all into different sections. Then our 4 programmers would begin to write out everything. And during that writing process, we would capture all of our work into media that would better illustrate the engine development. We would elaborate on things with footnotes so that people with different base knowledge could come in and read the work, as well as we would reflect on our writing and then summarize so that people who didn't necessarily want to read 22 pages of blog could just get the summary notes. Lastly, we would bring in our editor, Jared, to kind of refine the post and make it more readable, because at the end of the day, the meaning behind these posts is for people to not just get a lot of good details, but for them to be able to learn off of it. And so it was important for us to keep our blogs readable.
Going off that same point, we found that people weren't willing to dive into 22-page blogs, and we also had more content than just our weekly blogs. We had our postmortems, and we started having interviews that all tied together. So this is where our compendiums actually came in. This is the thread connecting all of our documentation content, so that way someone can jump in easily and look at a specific subsystem and really learn from it. And speaking of learnings, we also learned quite a bit from this project that isn't necessarily just from doing development. Particularly talking with professionals. We found professionals helped us through our entire project. In pre-production, they were able to give us advice on what the direction of the project should be. So they were actually the ones who told us we should be making games, not just one, but multiple. And at the time, we thought they were crazy. But now, after the project, we realized how valuable it really is. And then during production, they helped us so much because we're a bunch of novices making a game engine, but when we were talking to them, they would let us know what we didn't know that we didn't know. And this was really valuable for us. In terms of creative decisions, you might think, oh, you're a technical project, you did all your pre-production, you shouldn't have many. However, unlike normal ETC projects where it's focusing on game or art assets, all our creative decisions came from our actual engine implementations. We had a lot of decisions to make, whether we were doing it for usability, performance, and so there's just still a lot of decisions that we had to make even though we had our roadmap laid out. And finally, code review. This is something we feel like we did really well through our semester. So although we had code review with faculty, we also did code review internally every week with our team. So this helped us grow individually because we were able to get feedback on our code as well as see what the other developers were developing and learn from their experience. It also helped the team stay on the same page because we were able to see everyone's subsystem and stop bad code from going into a code base before it happened. We have a lot of other lessons that we learned from this project, and we actually have a postmortem for every single section, as well as our overall project. So you might think that these lessons are just for an engine project. However, we think they can be applied to almost any ETC project, including future technical projects. They're something that we really would like to see integrated into future semesters. We'd like to thank all of the faculty, all of the game jammers, as well as all of the professionals who helped us along the way. We are the Isetta Engine project. We developed a game engine, which was supplemented by all of our other deliverables to demystify game engine development. We are now open for questions. Thank you.
Chris.
So I have a question and a comment. The question first is, so how many years is it going to be before BBW is run on the Isetta engine?
Hopefully, it will never be run on our engine. So the question was, how long till BVW will be run on the Isetta engine? And so the big thing that we learned was to get a stable and reliable and robust engine takes a lot more work than what we initially had thought. There's stuff like unit testing that we weren't able to do throughout it to create this stable engine that we'd want other people to use.
Oh, because I was going to use it next summer in the high school. Now they're wondering whether I was serious.
It would be good for your engine, but bad for BBW.
Correct. Maybe good for all the technical students who really want to break stuff.
There was a time when it was common practice for game studios to make their own engines, and now that practice is rare due to the presence of Unity and Unreal. Do you think that is a trend that is going to stabilize, or do you think we are likely to see a change in the world where it may become normal for people to build engines again?
So the question is, there used to be a time where game engines were developed in all studios, and now a lot of them are relying on Unity and Unreal to develop their games. Is that practice going to continue?
So that's actually a question that we got to ask all of the professionals who work on game engines when we were talking to them. And what they told us was not necessarily surprising, but enlightening in that, yes, Unity and Unreal are taking a lot of studios into this space of using commercial engines that are available to everybody. But what most of them actually even said was, like, that will get you most of the way there. It'll get you your 90 or 95%, but then in order to specialize, do those things that other games don't, such as like some, I don't know, artificial intelligence animation system, you kind of need to go in and build your own features out. And when you need to do that in another engine, as probably a lot of our game jammers found, it gets really messy when you're trying to implement your own system. And so a lot of the professionals even said, like, no, that practice is here to stay. It might reduce now that the necessity is less, so that like other studios can just whip up games faster and start iterating on the development. But when it comes to like the number of studios actually developing their own engines, we'll probably still see that as a stable like ratio.
Also on top of that, we were actually able to ask some people from Santa Monica Studios about exactly this, and they were saying they'll never stop making their own engines because they really want to push the hardware. That kind of goes back to the thing of like Unity and Unreal are great, but they're never dedicated to one specific device. And so if you want to develop and push one specific device, it's probably better for you to develop your own.
What are the pros and cons of being on a team mostly programmers and all boys?
So the question was, what are the pros and cons of being on a team of all programmers except for Jared, and all boys? We'll let Jared take it.
Yeah, I think I can speak to this. So, coming on board to this team of programmers, there's certainly a culture difference. Programmers work all day and all night. That is expressed in my documentary. I hope you see the whole thing at playthroughs. Anyway, it's a little bit difficult because they're very perfectionistic and they need to be cut off at a certain point. There are a lot of features in the engine and the programmers really want to get around to all of them. And so as a producer, it's really essential to make sure that they are keeping themselves on a deadline and not getting behind. And as for a team of boys, I don't know.
Talking about that a little, would it have been nice to have more female influence in our project? For sure. However, we would like to think that just because we're all boys, our room wasn't just full of fart jokes and stuff like that. So it's something we definitely did consider early on in the project, and also tried to make sure that we were thinking about when writing some of our blogs and stuff like that.
All right, it's time.